All right. So recording. So today we're talking about cycle analytics and engineering metrics. And I'm sharing a little bit of background about some of the things I went through as an engineering manager and why I love metrics. A little bit of the background, I'll just briefly repeat some of the things I said before we started the recording. But I was talking about, the typical engineering management, which, you have some form of a Jira board or data from your project plan tool. You're able to draw some conclusions, but a lot of times the conversations you have are around, gut feel or theories that you don't really have a way of necessarily having the data to reflect that. So it makes for emotional conversation, makes it hard to determine what are the bottlenecks or areas that you want to invest in. So transitioning into a more engineering metrics driven leadership, I really loved it because the biggest shift was actually how you have those conversations. You no longer come with this emotionally charged theory that doesn't have a lot of data to back it up. And instead, you're able to have a view week to week to your team if you're tracking at that level, where you can notice shifts and changes fairly quickly. And just like doing, performance reviews, instead of coming to somebody after 6 months and saying, I don't think you're doing well, you're able to come ahead of it and say, hey, it looks like our trend is going down. What could possibly be some of the issues that you're facing? And the way I approach a lot of these conversations is just, coming at it very understanding that our engineers are working really hard. And if things are taking longer, it's likely something that we can address. It could be the review cycle. It could be a bottleneck in our pipeline, flaky tests that are just constantly requiring maintenance and so on. So that's my biggest interest and why I love metrics, because I found it to be a really great way of helping the team be efficient and less stressed about, these bottlenecks and some of the ups and downs that come with the cycle. So I wanted to chat with both of you because there are a couple of things that I'm working on. The first one is a pulse survey, and that one is a bit of a subjective survey that I send out weekly. So I'd love to get ideas from you if you think that's something we can start to iterate on within the product. And then the next thing is cycle analytics. So we've introduced throughput. It's been really great. But as we look at this with the managers, we want to be able to debug. So like if we go back to the example I was saying where we see a trend going down in throughput, it's really hard right now to figure out where in the cycle it's taken longer. So cycle analytics could give us a view into, well, it takes a day to get the code up, but it takes 7 days to review it and merge it. And then we'd be able to make educated, investment in the review cycle, because that's where we're seeing a lot of time being spent. So I'll stop talking and turn it over to you.
Dalia, I have a quick question. You talked a little bit about being metrics driven in an engineering organization, but one thing I've always been curious about is the difference between how we've been thinking about cycle analytics versus value stream management. And the way that we always think about that is cycle analytics is like a CE feature that's very prescriptive and these are the things that you need to worry about. VSM is much more flexible and said depends on how you're using GitLab, you can kind of create and customize analytics that kind of suit your need. As you as an expert in your expertise, do organizations kind of know what metrics that they want, that they're looking for, and kind of think about it in the same way? Or do you kind of have to teach, or do people kind of think about it in different ways that kind of favors that more prescriptive kind of approach to metrics, to say GitLab is this is how you should think about cycle time, as opposed to how do you think about cycle time, and then we are flexible enough to meet that need?
Yeah.
What makes sense to you?
From what I've seen, very few engineering leaders have an idea of what they want to track or how to use the metrics. I mean, actually, the pitfall of metrics, and a lot of times you may see it without naming competitors, but in some of the documentation, they explicitly say, don't share these with your executives because they will get hung up on numbers. Well, that's not a very great way. Why don't we just pick metrics that make sense? And that way you don't have to hide them from anyone and you're able to speak to them. So what I've found is that actually, because there's not a lot of awareness around how to use engineering metrics, at least from what I got, so please understand I'm not an expert on every single engineering leader here. what I found is that actually coming up with recommendations on how to use specific metrics is more helpful than leaving people with a ton of data to draw their own conclusion or to structure it. There are leaders who are able to do that effectively, but I've seen it used in a way that makes it even less effective than if you didn't have the metrics in the first place, and that makes me a little sad. But I think to start, it would be good for us to be opinionated about them.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like that's definitely reflective of my conversations, which is like everyone kind of says cycle time, but they kind of think about that all very differently in slightly different ways. So the language, I think, in the vernacular is similar, but like the devil's in the details, and I think that's an opportunity for us to be opinionated. But yeah, so I would love to hear more about like the second, like being able to kind of like identify bottlenecks. But like I'm sure Virginia has like her own questions. She's really excited, so
yeah, sure. Well, so go ahead and like Virginia, let's start with you. And at the same time, I will try to find some links around the Epic. So I created an Epic for dashboard a few months back. That would be great if I could get your feedback on, and then we can dive into any specific metric that you like. But my hope is like when I talk about engineering metrics, I don't think that there is one number that can really be a representative of how the team is doing. It's a kind of a multifaceted, formula where you have throughput, you have cycle time, you have how the team is doing on quality. So quality metrics are important. And, just a small tangent here, what you can have high throughput, but all the team is doing is fixing bugs that they introduced in production. That's not very productive because at the end of the day, you're really not providing value. So having engineering metrics that complement each other to basically give you that value, like, yes, the team is providing value because their level of investment is in the right categories, and we can dive into a little bit more into how do we accomplish that with what we have, or what do we need to build to get that visual. But anyways, so I'll
Hi, did you sorry, I didn't hear you in the end.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say, like, if you have any questions, I'm happy to, we can talk through them.
Yeah, so we were actually just discussing with Jeremy just 15 minutes ago, how should we think about the framework to start with before we actually dive in the metrics, because I feel that a lot of us have a lot of opinions, and I kind of agree with what you're saying, that you need to be able to have a way to, maybe even through widgets and stuff like that, where you can actually combine a lot of different visualizations to be able to give you the different aspects of, for example, of quality, as you were saying, like, am I investing in the right place? It doesn't matter that I'm sending that many MRs if it's all about bugs, and because it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. People are going to be doing more MRs, more bugs, and so on. So if that's the metric that you're going to be evaluating them on, then it's kind of like incentivizing them to do the wrong thing. So initially what we were thinking was, do you feel that, for example, if we have a folder structure from basically starting from a group perspective, and then you have different projects, and we probably need to figure out actually how we should do it, authentication there, if not everyone is able to have access to the same project. If you had there, and then, for example, it goes down to the file level, but on the right you have different metrics and different sort of dashboards. Do you feel that this would be a useful way to kind of come to the product and then start with looking at it?
Sorry, I was on mute. I think, I mean, what we may have to do is basically figure out what is the first iteration with what we have that provides value. So, to take a step back, the most value I'm able to get is when we aggregate contributions across multiple projects. So the level of view that is useful to me is where my engineers are contributing, wherever that may be. So however that translates into, okay, how do we capture that data? I would also add that this is actually one of the harder use cases that many of the competitor tools don't do, and why a lot of people rely on using their APIs to aggregate it outside of the tool is because most of your engineering team will contribute to more than one repo. And those tools don't capture that. You have to kind of, query this, and then aggregate yourself to get that view. Whereas I think with the GitLab product, we might be able to do it at a group level, which is more powerful because we're representing contributions regardless of which project you're on.
Mm-hmm. And so in general, it will be quite beneficial, even if we have some sort of a tree where we start from the group level and go to the file, then we still want to probably be able to filter either by one individual or, for example, just from your team, if it's basically within a specific group or specific project. Okay, so both of these would be quite beneficial. And in terms of the specific metrics that you were mentioning, if we start from what is the absolute most important thing that you would like to see, and we kind of forget about the number of MRs and number of views.
Yeah.
Would you say you would start from test coverage, or not necessarily your biggest concern?
Wouldn't necessarily be like the first one that I would recommend we start with. So like the two that come to mind, for us, now that we're using throughput, it would be the throughput representation and the cycle analytics. And the cycle analytics being important if we can start to define, how are we transitioning between stages? So when an MR gets created, how long does it take to get merged? That's a great data point, even if we're not able to necessarily dive in yet, but the following iteration being able to say, this is how long it takes in test, this is how long it takes in review, because we're already having conversations where we know that the review cycle is one of the areas that we need to address. It would be great to have a representation. Is this a gut feel, or is this an actual fact that, our MRs are sitting in, for X number of days before they're able to get merged because of the review cycle.
Mm-hmm. And then when you were saying in terms of throughput, that's basically like the number of MRs per person on average and stuff like that.
So throughput is actually, it doesn't take into account, like this is not an average per person. Throughput, what I'd like to get out of it is by group and then slice by team. So it would not be an individual metric. It would be, this is the output of this team of people contributing on whatever projects they're using or a part of. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes, I would imagine that ultimately you do want to filter at whatever level you're interested in.
Yeah, up to the team level. I think this might be a little bit of a sensitive area, but when it comes to looking at these metrics, I really like to remind people that we're looking at it from a team perspective, not an individual perspective. So these are not metrics that we would use for individual performance. That there are other ways we can, dive in, and if someone is struggling, we have other ways of checking how they're doing. But typically this is just a team and group level view. We want to generally have a good way to say this group of people they're contributing to this stage of the product, and they're able to produce, or their throughput is at this trend. We even don't like to talk about raw numbers because the raw numbers don't really matter. It's the trend that we're trying to capture.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah. And would you say that the most important thing for you is now to, as you were mentioning about trend, is to actually have a visual representation of the trends rather than what we have right now in psychoanalytics, which is kind of like just a point in time kind of median?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers would be great. I think when I look at the product, the reason I'm not able to use psychoanalytics within the product is because a lot of it has not sufficient data. So even the numbers are not necessarily, I don't have numbers to start off with. So that would be like a good first iteration. If we think that this is a good investment, is to kind of focus on the algorithm and figure out how to get those numbers, and then we can add on the visualization after. For throughput, I don't know if we have anything currently in the product, but one of the initiatives that Mech's team has taken is bringing insight into GitLab. So that would be, how I would like to view the representation for throughput.
Yeah, I think he already put a couple of dashboards, and we need to figure out how we're actually going to combine this, because I think it has to be in the same place.
Yes.
I'll have a call with him later in the week.
Cool.
Okay. That's quite useful. Jeremy, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, so I mean, Dalia, have you seen the Insights page? I'm trying to bring it up right now, but it's available on .com.
Yeah.
This is So I'm here on the group level on GitLab org, insights, looking at the merge request dashboard. So this is available in product, which is kind of cool. The other thing I'm curious if you could talk through is, where did that go? Your create an engineering dashboard, Epic. Would you mind just chatting through this a little bit? What brought this up? What are we trying to accomplish with this?
Yeah, so I put this together because we started talking about throughput. I started having a lot of conversations, and I noticed that there's a theme. Like I keep telling people, this is just the first metric. Like this is one representation of the data, and I had a hard time conveying, okay, what am I looking at beyond throughput? So this is the epic that I put together to basically try to communicate some of that. And like I was saying, I see engineering metrics as, you know, a multifaceted representation. I need more data points basically to represent how the team is doing. So throughput on its own is one view into the team, but if we don't have categorization, for instance, within throughput, then it's really hard for me to say where is our level of investment. So here's a good example. We talk about throughput as one of my favorite metrics because gaming it is actually following the incentives. And you've heard Sid say that before. But what you don't have, if you don't have the categorization and the breakdown in throughput, is that if someone is just churning on bugs, so like the quality of their code is not up to the level, then you will see a high throughput, but you wouldn't be able to necessarily gauge where that investment is. Whereas if you start to break down where that throughput investment is going toward, then you'll be able to see that your bug count is going high, like your breakdown. And that's something that we've been able to do in Insight. So if you go to the Insight project, we represent those currently with the labels. So we can look at a group and see, here, I'll send you a link if you want to take a look at it without picking so much on like one particular team, but let's try plan, for instance. You can see if you pull up this dashboard that not only do we have a good view into the throughput, but we also have a representation of where the level of investment is going. So based on this, we are investing quite a bit in backstage. We are doing good number of community contributions. We have some bugs, but we're not necessarily going a full week and all we're doing is bugs. So Jeremy, if you could scroll down, what I'm looking at is the weekly throughput. Yeah, over here. So these are categorized by these 5 labels, and the gray is undefined, which means there hasn't been a particular label on that MR to where we can dedicate its investment toward a particular category. So this is the next level of debugging. This really allows myself and my managers to look at the breakdown and really notice some of these patterns and notice where are we investing a lot of time. If we feel that we're not doing a great job taking on community contribution, it will show up here. So like we wouldn't see any green, for instance, and then we can come back and talk to the team about, okay, how can we do better on the community contributions front? What are some of the ways that we can help make this easier for the team to champion and so on? So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to like throughput breakdown. This is a really great way to debug what you're looking at from throughput numbers.
So you kind of have a mental idea of what baseline looks like in terms of both the height of the column and also the shares of it inside it, and then you're looking for deltas, and you're saying like, oh, there's no community contributions in like this particular week. How can we resolve that?
Yeah, to some extent, you don't want to panic too much from a week-to-week metric. This is a good way to do it so that you're on top of what's going on with the team. But you're absolutely right. That is how I use it with my managers. Is we pull this up, we look at it on a weekly basis. I look at these metrics because, as you can tell, like I would meet with my managers throughout the week. So I pull it up very frequently. We have conversations around, what is impact our trend? So again, I don't look and say, uh-oh, this team is not, is only doing 40 MRs instead of 70. What's going on there? I would look at it and say, it looks like our trend week to week is dipping a little bit. Are there or is there a bottleneck that we need to address? It could also be something that doesn't need anybody to worry about, like holidays. I sure hope that people are taking their vacations and not, working on MRs when they're out. So that's why the week-to-week view has been really helpful, because we can take notes on these patterns and not really react so dramatically to something, because we're just seeing it as it's like in real time as we're going through it.
What other views are really helpful for you, Dalia? So like you wake up on Monday morning and you're like, what is going on? You've been on vacation for the past week or so. I wake up on Monday and you're like, okay, I want to know what's going on. So you go to this, and this is the view that you see. Where do you go? What questions are you trying to answer?
So I'll answer this as a manager and then as a director. So as a manager, I would look at it for my particular teams. I would pull up the week to week and really get a good view of what is our trend. Are we really struggling on a front, or it seems to be consistent and in line with expectations? So having that trend, not have these spikes that you're seeing. So like whatever team you're pulling up right now, that's a conversation that we have around feature freeze. So this is a very common GitLab pattern where people have been working on MRs. They're working really hard throughout the month, but they're not really merging up until the feature freeze week. So a conversation that I would have as a manager or as a director with my manager is to say, what is holding the team back from merging these MRs sooner? It could be that we're not breaking things down small enough to merge them throughout the month. It could be that the review cycle is really long, and by the time it gets merged, it's at feature freeze week. So there are a number of these things that having throughput represented this way allows me to have a conversation with the team and the managers around patterns and investments and bottlenecks.
Makes sense. I mean, it's all around outliers. It's just identifying outliers, both in like the share of like the throughput and also the height of the column.
Yep.
So I think it's a UX challenge that I think we need to figure out. But I think that's those outliers are going to look a little different for every organization. But that's what we need to do.
Exactly. And then I will add something just from a director perspective. I mean, this is something I get in interviews, I get from my managers when they join, is how do you define success for me? And it's really hard, because at the manager level, you could just arbitrarily say, well, you have to have, the team is happy and productive and yada, yada. For me, metrics allow me to define success with my managers and give them a way to have autonomy in execution while we have an agreed upon level of this is what success looks like. So when I'm able to kind of take a look at the team's throughput, when I have quality metrics, when I have happiness survey, I'm able to talk to my managers about these being success criteria, and then allow them to own how to solve it for their team, allow them to execute with their team in whatever way fits their model. Because that's kind of another thing as we grow, is that I don't know that we can come up with a formula that's going to work for every single team and every time zone and every shape of, between senior and intermediate. So I want managers to have that autonomy, but I also have to have accountability. And this is accountability with autonomy, associated with it.
Cool. Makes a lot of sense. Dalia, I'm going to have to set up more time to talk through Pulse Check. But with Pulse Check, like, I think I kind of understand your needs there.
Yeah.
Choices. I think it makes sense to now no one permanently. There we go. Okay.
Sorry, I lost
so
you
Pulse
for a
Check
minute.
makes total sense. No, I know. I kept voting on and everyone froze, and I'm like, okay, great. Pulse check makes total sense, I think. I think you want an issue. I still think wonder if polls in plan and issues are the place to start. I think that's where it makes the most sense.
Yeah.
But I will set up more time and we can talk through if there are any other avenues that we can pursue. But I would love to see that in the product as well. So
that would be great. Yeah. And full disclosure, I would love to learn more about it, because that's an area of the product I don't have a lot of experience with. So you can educate me, and I love that.
That sounds awesome. All right, cool.
Cool. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate it. Ping me if you have any questions, and I'm so happy to help with this effort. I'm very excited about it, as you can tell, if you can't tell.
We're super excited about it as well. So I know Virginia has like some great ideas. Like she's moving forward with design discovery in like 12. Awesome. So Virginia, I guess we can continue working with Dalia like along the way.
Very nice.
I will probably be bothering you quite a lot.
Yeah.
Happy to. All right. Bye, y'all.
Great
Thank
seeing you.
you.
See you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.